Hey, Tate, what presentation's going on right now?
I don't know. Let's ask Jodabot. Hey, Jodabot, what's happening right now? Right now, it's time to learn about building a bot with Synergy.net.
What? Who's giving that presentation?
It's Phillip, Bratt, and Tate Chamberlain. Oh, wait a minute, that's us.
That's us!
Ah.
Well then, I'm Phillip Bratt. I worked in Synergex support for 3 years.
And I'm Tate. I worked with Synergex for about 2.5 years.
All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about bots. So what is a bot? Well, a bot is software that runs as a web service. It's a conversational tool that interacts with users, and you may have interacted with some bots in the past, such as Skype has a bot, there's the Slack bot, there's interactive bots like the Mimcat bot that gives you memes from the internet. There's also the Your Face bot. This bot takes a picture of your face and then tells you what it thinks of your face. There's also the solitaire bot, so a bot that allows you to play solitaire with it, or the Sift bot, which is a language understanding bot. Bots that are tied to accounts that give you access to services and stuff also exist, like the Foursquare bot or the Azure bot for Microsoft's Azure services. And probably the most common known bots are Alexa with Amazon, the Siri bot, and Cortana. And everyone should know about what those do. They take input and answer your questions and find you good places to eat, right? So today we're focusing on the Microsoft's Bot Framework. Now, some of these bots have been built with the Microsoft's Bot Framework. And what Microsoft's Bot Framework does is it gives you functionality right there built in that a lot of these bots have in common. A lot of these features have been put into the framework and make them easily accessible. And today our objective is to show you how accessible they are and help you in building your bot with the Microsoft Bot Framework and, of course, in Synergy.net. And to demonstrate some bot work in Synergy.net, we have Jodabot.
So Jodabot is a bot created for this conference and about this conference. One of the most important features of Jodabot is that it will ignore what you're saying. To demonstrate this, I will end this conversation and ask it a question. Now, Jodabot's designed to answer questions and give information about the presenters and events at this conference. So I'll ask it, who is Phil? And it will say nothing. Now that's intentional because right now I'm in Slack and I'm in a public channel. There are multiple people in this channel. Right now it's just me, Phil, and Jodabot. But because it's a public channel, we don't want Jodabot responding to everything it hears because a lot of it's not going to be relevant. It's just going to be saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you asked, over and over again. That would just flood the channel, and we don't want that. So instead, it will wait until you mention its name. So I'll say, hey, Jodabot, who is Phil? Now it will recognize that I mentioned its name, and we'll start a new conversation, and will give me the information about Phil. And now that a conversation is going, I can ask it another question, and since it's already listening, it will respond automatically without waiting to hear its name. And if I end the conversation, it will stop listening until someone mentions its name again. However, if I send it a direct message, a one-to-one conversation instead of a group conversation, so it won't need to wait until you say its name, I can ask it about events about Xamarin, and it will respond even though I didn't mention its name. Now in this case, it found multiple matches, and so it's going to give fewer details and a list of all the events. I can go into greater detail by entering the ID for one of the events. If I say E42, it will give more details about what that event is. So that's the basic functionality of Jodabot.
So let's go over a little bit about different types of bots. There are 3 different approaches to building a bot. One of those approaches is freeform. A freeform is a bot that is given a very specific task to perform, and goes about it in the most direct way it can. In this case, the bot is asking if the user wants to leave a review. The user can give it a yes or a no. Once it gets that response, then it'll ask for a review. Now, the review can be anything you want it to be. The bot isn't going to read the review or make a response to this. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to building the different types of bots. Keep in mind the questions of how dynamic can the user's response be to the bot, and how dynamic can the bot's responses be back to the user. And so with this in mind, and as a little bonus, try to think of ways that you would program a bot to do it, and then we'll explore that a little later on in the slides. The next one is the guided approach. The guided approach is exactly that. It's very guided. The bot is very restricted to what input it will receive and very restricted in what input it will give out. And so think about this bot as an example of a sandwich shop. Think of those old-fashioned delis where you get like a piece of paper and it tells you to fill in the blanks and which kind of things you want on your sandwich. Well, this bot is doing that in a digital form and guiding the user through filling out that form. And so as you can see in this first example, it asks, do you want 6-inch or 12-inch? The user responds 12, but the bot will only take 1 and 2 as its reply. And so you see it's very restricted. The bot isn't adaptive to what the user is saying. It just says what it wants and only takes what it wants to hear. To completely contrast this is the natural language bot. The natural language approach is trying to make the bot as lifelike as possible. As you can see here, the bot is asking the customer to create an appointment, and it can take anything as the response and be able to break down that response, and as you can see, not only take that response, but be able to put it in its own response back. So it's a dynamic response with input from the user, and the user can give it anything it wants, and it's able to take that and make it into an intelligible response. If you also note here, it says the user is giving it Saturday at 10, and the bot is smart enough to know that you probably mean 10 a.m., and you probably mean Saturday, May 13th, which is the upcoming Saturday, and 10 a.m. because that's during office hours. So now that we've talked about the variety of different ways to build a bot, let's ask ourselves, why the bot framework? You've probably seen a variety of SDKs out there that are available. Facebook has their own, but Microsoft's bot framework, it allows you to do one very crucial thing, and that's build one basic code base to extend to multiple channels. And what we mean by channels is different platforms for it to respond to. So you get one code base, and you take that code base and you can apply it to multiple different places, such as Kik or Skype, Slack, email, Facebook Messenger, GroupMe, Telegram, Microsoft Team, Twilio, and there's even more than that. So the framework even lets you get specific channel data, which allows you to take the data that's given to you from those channels and manipulate as if you were native on that channel, so you don't lose out on any of the features that are specific for bot frameworks to that channel. And as a note, some of these channels do require an account or even a developer's account to be on them. Included in this is you also get a variety of development tools. Since you are in Microsoft's bot framework, you have the access to the .NET framework, which comes with a variety of classes and built-in methods and things that all that stuff you get with the .NET framework is included in the bot framework. Then that also allows you to build your bot in the Visual Studio editor, as well as host your bot on the web service on Azure. And there's a lot of built-in features for the bot to be published on Azure, and prices may vary. This all comes from Microsoft's developer account. Of course, I don't work for Microsoft, so I'm not going to give you their pitch, but it does give you a lot of advantages that way. There's also a variety of APIs that are available to make your bot more lifelike. You have the Bing API, which allows you to search for links and images on the web. Bing also has a speech-to-text API, which allows your bot to audibly hear and listen to what the user is giving you and put that to text that it can then interpret using Microsoft's cognitive services, such as Lewis. Lewis is a language understanding service that breaks down the user input into something that your code can understand and build a reply that feels natural, just like you're talking to a real person. Combine that with Cortana, now your bot is able to talk back. And so now your bot can listen and talk, and even with the channels such as Skype, your bot can physically call people and talk to them, which is really amazing. Then, of course, we can't fail to mention Synergy Code, which works perfectly in concert with the Bot Framework. And, of course, since they are paying me, there we go.
So how do we get started building a bot with Synergy.net? I'm going to give you a demonstration and show you how to do that. So we've put together a project template for a bot project. We actually have two templates. One is just bot library, and the second also has a hosting project, so you can host it as a web service. As you see here, we have the bot library, which is just a regular Synergy.net class library with a few additional NuGet packages added in and a few base source files. Then the bot library with Web API host is the same thing, but also has an additional project that lets you run the bot as a RESTful web service. We'll create that so you can see how easy it is to get started. So, the project has been created, and as you see here, we have two projects, the bot, which is again the class library, and the host project. Some important things about the host project is the web.config file. This file has two important keys, the Microsoft App ID and Microsoft App Password. When you register your bot on Microsoft's Bot Framework, you'll get specific values for App ID and password. You need to fill those in here in order to connect your bot to the framework and access all the features. So before going into the actual code in the bot, let's give it a run and see how it works. We'll build it. It loads all the NuGet packages. We'll look into those a bit later. And it will build the app and launch it using Microsoft Edge. You could use any other web browser, but that's the default. So here we have the landing page for the bot. Now, this particular page doesn't do much, just tells you what the bot is. You could customize this, but because this is a RESTful web service, the important thing is this URL right here, where messages can be sent and received. We could do that manually, but I'll use the Bot Framwork channel emulator. This is a program that's open source. It comes as part of the Bot Framework, and it allows you to test your bot projects either locally or on the web. So it's really useful for testing during development, so you don't actually have to publish your app in order to test it and see how it works. So I'm going to go to that URL and connect, and I'm going to say hello. So as you can see, this is an echo bot. By default, the bot project receives a message and sends it back to you along with saying how many characters it was. Now we'll go into the code to see how that works. Here in the bot library, we'll take a brief look at the references, in particular at the NuGet packages. You'll see that the main NuGet package is the Microsoft.bot.builder. This has all the classes you need to access the bot framework. It comes with a number of dependencies, including the Newtonsoft.json, which Steve talked about in one of his presentations. This converts messages to and from JSON and allows the bot to act as a RESTful web service. All of that is done behind the scenes, so you don't have to worry about it. The messages controller.dbl is a controller class, which is another thing that Steve mentioned during his RESTful Web API presentation. As you see, this receives messages and sends them on to another class, which is the messages dialog class. This class receives messages and generates a message to send in response. You see this message takes the message text and the length of the message and sends it back in a response. Now this is a dialog class, which is an important way to maintain state in a bot project. So an important aspect of bots and of all RESTful web services is that they are stateless. This means that the program itself doesn't keep track of the state of the conversation or of its interaction with any users. That's important because these services need to be scalable. You can run one bot on multiple web servers and have hundreds or possibly thousands of users interacting with them at once. In order to do that, you can't have the program keeping track of all those different conversations by itself. It needs to be stateless. But on the other hand, for a conversational bot, you expect it to keep track of the state of the conversation. So how do you do this? Well, there are many ways, but the dialog class provides an easy, self-contained way to keep track of state. The dialog class is serializable, so it can be serialized and sent as part of the JSON data back and forth between the user. That way, the state is maintained on the client side, and it will send back the state. The program will deserialize the class and remember what state it's in. Let's give an example of this. So I'm going to add a new member that will count how many responses have been sent. So I'll create a new variable named counter, which is an int that will start at 0. And each time we receive a message, we will increment the counter. And then in the response message, we will also give the value of the counter. Let's see how that works. We'll rebuild the project and run it again. Now, I'll say hi, and you'll notice at the end of the response, it will say 1. If I say something else, it'll say 2. Now, if I start another conversation with the same bot, the counter will be back to 1. This is a different conversation, and the same bot project is able to keep track of the state of the two different conversations at the same time. It doesn't need to track the state itself because the dialog class, which is sent back and forth, keeps track of it. I'll go back to the original conversation and say bye. And you'll see here, it remembers the state of this conversation and says the counter is at 3, whereas the counter in the other conversation is still at 1. So that shows you how easy it is to quickly start a bot project with Synergy.net. All this is Synergy code in the bot library class project. And you can test it on your local system. And it keeps track of the state of the conversation through a dialog class. So to summarize, there are 2 project templates for the bot, and these are not part of the default SDI, but they are available on GitHub. They're available right now, and we'll give you the link at the end of the presentation. There's the bot library and the bot library and web API host, which lets you host the project as a RESTful web service. It sends and receives messages with JSON, it holds the app ID and password, and it also has references to the bot builder NuGet package and its related NuGet packages. The bot library is the Synergy class library. It has a controller class, which processes incoming message. It has a dialog class to respond to the messages and to maintain state. And we've also talked about the channel emulator, which lets you test things locally.
So let's go back and revisit those 3 different types of bots we were talking about and basically say how is this accomplished with Bot Framwork. So the first kind that we'll go back to is freeform. Now, if you remember a freeform, it takes input from the user of a yes or no, and then if it gets a yes, it asks for a review. Now, what it's doing here is the bot state service is keeping track of the context and knowing that the user has given a yes, so I'm going to ask for a review. And then it's using the connector service to basically send and receive those messages, making almost a terminal-like interaction. Just you say this, it says this, and then back and forth, and then it just logs the conversation. So it's only using those 2 services to do that. Tate explained the dialog class. Now, the dialog class does a lot of this for you. There's different types of dialogues, like a yes, no, string dialogue, numbers, enumeration dialogues. And there's compound dialogues. Now, the advantage to a compound dialogue is it allows you to keep state within a dialogue and create a dialogue stack. And so as you add inter dialogues within a dialogue, it will keep track of the outer dialogue. So as an example, in this one, we have a bot that's asking for a customer to identify himself. This is the start of dialogue 1. Once it has identified the user, it then asks the user if he wants to place an order. If the user does want to place an order, it starts up dialogue 2. Once the order is complete, it ends dialogue 2, but as you can see, the bot still knows who the user is and is able to still identify him until it comes to the end of dialogue 1. And so that is the power of the dialogue stack, and using dialogue chains, which is built in, you can manipulate the stack and how your dialogues flow. Going to our next example is the guided bot. Now, the guided bot uses a special kind of dialogue called form flow. What form flow allows you to do is basically that. It allows you to fill out a form. Now, if we think about the sandwich bot, you think about all those different fields that are being filled out on the form, like what kind of meat do you want and what kind of cheese. Those are broken down into fields on the form inside the dialogue. Then you can give those different fields attributes, giving your bot what kind of a response you want when it asks for those fields. Then you can add in your own business logic using validate result, which allows you to take what's given to the bot and make sure that that works with the business logic that it's been given. But let's say that you want to add pitas to your sandwich shop. Well, if your user selects a pita, then they aren't going to need to know if it's 6 or 12 inch and you want to skip a lot of that dialogue. You can use the form builder, which allows you to skip around and bring up old dialogues as you see fit in order to create the flow of that form. Then at the end, you can use the field reflectors, which allows you to take what input you've been given on the fields and basically reflect them and put them in the bot's response. And so let's say at the end, the bot wants to make sure that this is the sandwich you want to order. It knows all the different orders that you have for all the fields and is able to output those and ask you, is this really what you wanted? Then, of course, there's the current UI culture, which allows it to be multilingual and make rules for that. And this is all within the form dialogue. Switching to our last kind, there's the natural language bot. Now, natural language bot is a little more complex. That uses pattern language. We've mentioned pattern language when we were talking about attributes with the guided bot. It says how the bot is supposed to structure its responses. And you're able to put in dynamic fields and variables, so then the bot is able to take inputs that has been given and create a dynamic response using pattern language. You give it a sentence structure and layouts and basically say, here's how I want you to respond, and here's where you put in these variables. Now, in order to break down what the user is saying, though, you have to use what's called language understanding. Now, the purpose of language understanding is to break down responses into intents and entities. The intent is the action of the response, and the entities are the value of that intent. So if we look at this first example that we were mentioning earlier, the user says that they want to schedule an appointment. In this case, the schedule is the intent, and then the entities are Saturday and 10. And so it's able to take those, and if you use something like Lewis, you can train it up to take that and make that into a response that your code can then pick up and use a certain method and then a certain pattern language to know how to respond to that. There are alternatives to language understanding, of course. You can always use regular expressions, which the regex class is built into the .NET framework. And that's actually what JodaBot uses. And so we'll kind of show you how JodaBot is able to take inputs and make responses.
All right. So we'll look at JodaBot and the code behind it and how it uses regular expressions to process queries. So I'm going to run this just like it did for the sample project. And this is the same code that we have running on Slack, but this is running locally. So I'll use a channel emulator to talk to it. I'll ask it, who is Phil? So here we have a dialog class, just like I showed you for the default project. This class, JodaBot, as I mentioned before, recognizes whether it's in a group conversation or a one-to-one conversation. So it's checking right here, is this a group conversation? Now this is message data. We could go into actual channel data right here, but this is generic data that's available regardless of the channel that you use. It asks, is this a group conversation? If it is, and if this isn't an existing conversation, then we'll use a regular expression, which is a string of characters designed to search for matches. And we'll see if it says Jotobot, ignoring the case. If it doesn't say Jotobot, and it's a group conversation, and it's not an existing conversation, then it won't respond. Otherwise, it will say that the message is relevant, and it will continue to process the query. Go to the next spot. So again, it's using a regular expression. If it matches right now, then it will tell you that it's time to learn about building a bot. That's how we got it to respond at the very start of this presentation. We saw before it was asking if this matches a presenter name. So this uses several regular expressions to see if there's a match for a certain word that's likely to be talking about a presenter. In this case, who. Now the query is who is Phil, so it has the word who. So now Jotobot realizes that you're probably talking about a presenter. Step out of there. We're back here. So this is a match for presenter name. So now we're going to tokenize the query. So break up the question, who is Phil, into individual tokens. So it breaks up the query into individual tokens. Who is Phil? So it ignores common words such as who, which is part of the match for presenter. So the only two tokens are is and Phil. It's going to go through each of those and see if there's a match for it in our ISOM files. So here we're in a method called getPresenterByNickname, which searches the nickname field for one of the tokens. In this case, the token is, and there's no one with that nickname, so it won't find anything. Next, it's looking for Phil, and Phil is a nickname in one of the records. So it uses a select statement, and it will find a record for Phillip, Phil, Bratt, and it will return that to the user. So it narrows down the list if there are multiple responses. For instance, if I search for Phillip Bratt, it would come up with 2 records. We only want one of those. So it eliminates duplicates and finds relevant records, and it will return those to the user. So as you can see, it found Phillip, it found this image, which is a URL in the ISOM files, and retrieved that from the web, and it found the information about him, and returned that to the user. So that shows how Jotobot responds to a user. Now we're going to look at how to register and publish a bot using Azure. So the first step is to create a web service through the Azure portal. This is assuming that you already have an account with Azure. So on the Azure portal, you create a new web service. You could also create a bot service, but that's designed for scripting language. If you want to create a bot using the Bot Builder NuGet package in Visual Studio, which includes any Synergy bot, you're going to want to create a web app. So you create the app, give it a name and a resource group. You could activate application insights if you want. I'm not going to do that. So you create the app, and in a few seconds, it will deploy it for you. As you can see, the app is ready to go with a URL there. The next step is to publish your code to your service. In order to do that, you need to download the Azure SDK if you haven't already. So from the Azure webpage, you can select the SDK for the version of Visual Studio that you're using, save that, and install it. So once you've installed the Azure SDK, you can publish your bot. Right-click on the project and select Publish. assuming that you're signed in and the SDK is installed, it should list the service that you've just created. So select that service, validate the connection just to make sure that everything works. Then you can select file publishing options. For this purpose, I'm using the 32-bit version of the program in debug configuration, and I'm choosing to replace any existing files there. And at this point, you can publish. It will rebuild the project and copy the files to the Azure Web Service. And there you see, everything's now working. Now that you've published your code, you need to register your bot on the Microsoft Bot Framework bot portal. The interface has changed slightly since we recorded this, but it's still fairly similar. So you can choose a bot icon, give it a name, give it a handle and a description. And this is the place, well, first of all, you copy the URL, make sure that it's using HTTPS, and point it to the API endpoint, API/messages. And this is the point where you create the app ID and password. You're going to copy the app ID and put it in the web.config file, as I showed you earlier. Create a password, and do the same thing for that. Now that you're finished with that, just agree to the terms and register, and your bot will be ready to go. Well, almost. At this point, the bot is registered, but you won't be able to use it because you haven't uploaded the version with those credentials. So you have to publish the bot again, copy up the files, make sure everything's up to date, and at that point, you'll be able to interact with your bot on the website. And there you go. So, the next step is to add and configure channels. Now, by default, when you register a bot on the bot portal, it configures 2 channels for you, Skype and web chat. But there are a lot of other channels to choose from. We're going to step you through how to set up Slack. It's changed slightly since we recorded this, but it's very similar. You select the channel, and it takes you through this tutorial, which will walk through the steps to configure the app. This takes you to the Slack website, and if you're already signed in, you can create an app and choose your Slack team to host the app. Walk through these various steps, and again, it steps you through everything, so you don't have to worry about missing every step here. It's pretty self-explanatory on the website itself. You'll need to add a redirect URL in the Slack app. You're going to need to create a bot user. So you do that on the Slack page. That's on the basic information page. Add a bot, because there are many different types of apps you can have on Slack, but in particular we want a bot user in order to interact with the bot. Add the user. Save your changes. Now you're going to need credentials for Slack, and you can do that also on the basic information page. Another thing you can do here is upload an icon. Now you copy the client ID and client secret over to the Bot Framework webpage. Paste those in here and submit the credentials. authorize it on Slack, and then enable the bot on Slack. Once you've done that, you can go over to Slack, and the bot will be added, and you can start interacting with it. So that's a very high-level view of how to create and publish an app on Azure and interact with it and get it all set up. There are a few extra steps you'll need to do to actually publish it for general use, but these are the basic steps you'll need to do.
And so all of this is available on the GitHub. If you're going to copy down any of the links, that first one there is the GitHub link for our templates that we've made for the bot to get you going. Then, of course, there are some links that we've included for stuff that we've shown to that you'll also need to go and go to these links, make accounts, and register in order to get going with your bot. But with that, we've armed you with enough knowledge that you should be able to get going in making your bot and living your dream.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah. Thanks.